So, Avengers Endgame, the conclusion to the Infinity Saga, is finally out. And has been for quite a while, actually. I know. I'm sorry this video is so late. And I mean, I think you guys might know how excited I was for this film. I might have mentioned it 1 or 2 times over the years. I mean, really, it's the combination of excitement for a film that is both the culmination of my favorite movie franchise and a cinematic universe I've been invested in for years, and basically not knowing any specific plot details before going in. And also this being the follow-up to a huge cliffhanger, how could this not be one of my most anticipated movies of all time? So, at long last, let's talk about it.
If we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn sure we'll avenge it.
And because this has been out for a while, I'm going full spoilers. But, come on, you've seen it by now. Regardless, here's the official spoiler alert. All the spoilers, you have been warned. So, what did I think of Avengers Endgame? Well, to the surprise of probably no one, I loved it. I loved so much of it. But this is kind of a hard movie to talk about. The thing with this film is, there is so much in it that it's difficult to make a review after just seeing it once. This one movie has so much movie in it, it's absolute insanity. This film is packed to the brim with stuff to talk about. I'm not sure if it's overcrowded. If it isn't, it's right on the line of having too much in it. But the vast majority of that stuff is just fantastic, especially for MCU fans. This is a film made for MCU fans, 100%. This is basically MCU fanservice, the movie, but I mean that in a good way. It's a unique kind of fanservice. It's not just fanservice for the sake of it being there. The fanservice in this film, in addition to all the fun references, are character arcs paying off, and satisfying emotional moments and reveals, and it all works into the story. Because of the nature of this universe, they managed to build an interesting story around the previous films, which kind of just makes almost every moment automatic fanservice, without it even trying to be, in the best way possible. Each moment from emotional ones, with Steve and Tony's character arcs ending, to funny ones with the Star-Lord dance, to badass ones with Cap vs. Cap. It's probably going to be the biggest movie of all time, and yet it still feels very personal for MCU fans, and that's just something that really impresses me. The thing is, I think I'm going to make a really in-depth video on this once it comes out on digital, like the one I made for Infinity War, because there is so much to talk about. This review is probably going to be quite long, but in the end, it's probably not everything I have to say about this, because there's just so much to take in and discuss. At the moment of writing this, for the record, I've only seen this once. The thing is, this movie has so much awesome stuff in it, it's almost an overload of it. When the film ended, I'd actually forgotten about the entire time travel plot because of how much insanity was in that final battle. The number of fantastic moments in this. One of these moments in any other MCU movie would be the best moment in the whole film. This movie has dozens of those. Think the Thor entering Wakanda moment, and then there are like 20 of those in the film. It's just crazy. And that's what I mean when I say it's almost too much to take in a good way. I barely even know where to start here. You know what? Let's start off with the main cast. I'll get to some of the other cast members throughout this review, because this movie's cast is crazy, but for now, firstly, the main ones that were in the trailers and all that kind of stuff. Firstly, my favorite character in the whole MCU is Steve Rogers, and he was definitely my favorite part of this film. When the Russos said that he had such a small role in Infinity War because his main arc was coming in Endgame, they weren't lying. This has not only some of the most amazing Captain America moments in the whole MCU, in fact, I'd say a majority of the best and most memorable moments in this film come from him, but also has a satisfying conclusion to his character arc. I guess I'm jumping ahead already, but this has easily my favorite ending of any MCU film ever, because of how perfectly it wraps up Steve's arc. For so many years, and over the course of all these films, I've been waiting for Steve to get the life that he deserves. A huge part of his character is feeling out of place and being a man out of time. A man who didn't get to live his proper life, and with this film, they finally gave him that. That's how they ended his character. He gets to live his life. And he gets his dance with Peggy, and that is the most perfect way they could have ended this film and Steve's arc. I mean, if you've seen my previous videos, you know I've been wanting that moment, and I don't know, it just made me so happy to see it. It's probably my favorite moment in this film. Yes, even more so than the other amazing moments that we'll talk about later. Those are incredible, but this just made me so happy that I think it might take it for me. And the song that's playing is called It's Been a Long, Long Time, and I'm pretty sure it's the one that was playing in Cap's apartment in Winter Soldier, which is a fun reference. Man, it's just such a perfect moment. I could talk about it for hours. So, Chris Evans is Captain America, favorite part of this film. Another character who didn't get that much to do in Infinity War was Black Widow. And honestly, I think Scarlett Johansson might give my second favorite performance in this film. Well, actually it's tied with Robert Downey Jr., who we'll get to, but this really surprised me. I've always enjoyed Black Widow in these films. She's a cool and interesting character, but for me, I think her character peaked in Winter Soldier, and since then, her story has never been as compelling as it was there. But here, she is fantastic. She sells some really emotional scenes, and I guess I was just surprised by how much I cared about her character in this. And then, of course, I can't very well go any longer without talking about Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. I mean, what do you want me to say? He's great. He's been great as this character since 2008. I really did like the direction they took him in this film, especially initially after the snap when he's mad at Steve. I feel like that is how he would react. After trying so hard to protect the world from this exact threat, and then failing, it would take a toll on him. And then having to decide whether or not to leave his family to help restore the world was an interesting conflict, and I felt his ultimate decision, again, made sense for his character. He has great moments in the action scenes. I really loved him finally getting the resolution he'd always wanted with his father. I thought that whole section of the film was fantastic and really heartwarming. And his big moment at the end was amazing. For it to be Tony Stark, the character that started this universe, to be the one to wield the Infinity Stones, kill Thanos, save the universe, and sacrifice his own life in the process, it was perfect. And the I am Iron Man line was just the cherry on top. Tony's death was also done really well with his goodbye to Peter and to Pepper. His funeral, when it went through basically the entire MCU, was emotional. The fact that they used the arc reactor from the first film makes it hit even harder. The thing is, on my first viewing of this film, I didn't cry at any point, and I think that's because it's just too much to take in. Like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there was just so much going on and so many moments to register and absorb and process that I couldn't even get really emotional with it. I think on my second viewing, I'll probably tear up at a few points. I will say, weirdly, the part of Tony's funeral that made me the most emotional and almost made me choke up a little was Nick Fury appearing at the end of it all. It just reminded me of where this universe began and those two characters' history together, and that was the part of that scene that hit me the hardest. Then there's Thor, and, well, we'll talk about Thor later. Then there's Hulk, and I'm still trying to decide how I feel about where they took his character. He's now Professor Hulk, or Bruce Banner and the Hulk fused together, and it's kind of weird, but not bad, necessarily. I did find it a little odd that they didn't show us how we got here. I mean, I guess this film's already got a lot going on, but considering this was like his 3-movie arc, going from where he ended in Infinity War, or technically where he ended at the very start of this film, to here, immediately, with no transition, is a little jarring. The CGI looks really amazing, I'll give it that. It looked way better than I thought it would, based on some of the promo art. I guess you need him in this state for the story to work. I was just a little underwhelmed by his character, I guess. He wasn't bad at all. I suppose I was just expecting a little more, considering the sort of arc they'd been setting up since Ragnarok. And here it was just like, yeah, it's fine. Now it's just Mark Ruffalo, but he's green and strong. But hey, to be fair, I did enjoy most of his scenes in the film. Hawkeye, or Ronin now, was pretty great. His first action scene was excellent and brutal for a PG-13 film. Reminded me a bit of the kind of more brutal, grounded action the Russos did for Winter Soldier. He has lots of cool moments in the action scenes throughout. His chase with the Outriders I thought was a really well done scene. It was a nice change of pace from the rest of the crazy epic battle kind of action, or the hand-to-hand stuff, with just a really intense chase scene. His emotional moments with Natasha and his family were also quite effective. He's such a great character in this, and it's such a shame they gave him such a stupid haircut. Alright, I'm kind of kidding. It's not like the haircut ruins the character or anything, and in most scenes, it's not actually that distracting. That being said, I've now seen the film, and I can say, with love for this movie and for this character, officially, I think it's a stupid look. But overall, I really liked him in this. I liked Paul Rudd as Scott Lang. He's always great as this character, and this is no exception. He had quite a few really funny moments, especially his interaction with Tony Stark. The one at Tony's house in particular, I thought was hilarious. Something that surprised me quite a bit is how much Nebula has to do in this film. She's up there with the original 6 in terms of screen time here. And I thought what they did with her character was interesting. Like I've mentioned before, I've never been super invested in her as a character or her relationship with Gamora. It's good, but in both Guardians films, for me, it's one of the less interesting plot lines. But the way they added to it here, by having her literally meet her past self and seeing how she's changed for the better and getting through to Gamora back when she was still kind of a villain, sort of. Let's say in the transition from villain to hero, I thought it was one of the most interesting ways they could have explored that character further. Rocket was good, had a few fun moments, although he's not really a main player in this. And similarly, even though he didn't get a ton to do, I liked Rhodey a lot here. I enjoyed his little moment with Nebula, and also his super dark suggestion for killing baby Thanos was one of the funniest moments in the film. Captain Marvel was fine, she was only there for like 2 minutes. Her big entrance in the final battle was quite a cool moment, but besides that, not much to say for her really. Pepper was good. I liked her little moment with Tony before he went off. I gotta say, I've never been super invested in the Tony and Pepper relationship, or at least not as invested as I am in some of the other MCU relationships. That being said, they do have good chemistry, and I did think their moments together, especially their goodbye as Tony was dying, were handled really well. And finally, Josh Brolin as Thanos is once again fantastic. Although the character definitely does take a backseat here compared to the last film, which I think is a good thing. He was set up very well in Infinity War, we get him. Now in this one, he's more of just kind of the bad guy that needs to be stopped rather than a main character. But again, he was set up in Infinity War, so it works. Also, that shot of him turning to dust, that seems like a shot that's going to become iconic in the next few years. One of many from this film, actually. Okay, I know I talked about how this film is full of insane moments and that I'm going to make a more in-depth video later on when the film comes out on digital, but I gotta talk about some of them here. Again, natural fan service that absolutely works. It doesn't feel forced in for the most part. There might be 1 or 2 moments, but for the majority of it, it totally flows with the story. It's this really incredible and unique way of doing fan service that's only possible with a universe this layered, and that's been going for this long. The fan service just completely makes sense for the story, and is also amazing. Like Alexander Pierce being there after the Battle of New York. Yeah, it's an awesome moment for fans, and was a fun surprise in this film for me, but it also makes sense. Like, he's the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. He would be there. Same thing with Jarvis being there from Agent Carter. Great reference that also makes sense. Also, they actually acknowledged something solely from an MCU TV show, which really surprised me and was a super fun moment. And good for James Darcy. I loved him on that show. Speaking of Pierce and Hydra and all that, the elevator scene was amazing. Such a small moment, but I mean, they got everyone back, Frank Grillo and Callum Mulvey. I think even some of the extras were the same. It was shot in the same way. It had an awesome payoff for the comic reference with the Hail Hydra moment. It's such a small moment, and yet it was so memorable for me. Captain America versus Captain America is obviously awesome. I don't know if there's much to explain there. The Star-Lord dance is one of my other favorite moments. I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but that's this film. It's pretty much 3 hours of favorite moments. But yeah, really funny. I really enjoyed the whole 1970s segment. There's Cap's small moment looking at Peggy, but especially Tony meeting his dad. For me, that was a really unexpected plotline. Again, it was something I thought would be cool. Pretty sure I've even mentioned it before in a video, but I didn't think they'd do it. And when you think about it, Tony's dad has actually been a really big part of his character throughout these films. And to finally get some closure on that, it's just another example of a really satisfying payoff. Loki, Red Skull, the Ancient One, the Avengers from 2012, there is so much in this film. Thor's mom shows up, which was actually a plot thread I really liked and had some decently emotional moments, especially for a character who I didn't really have any investment in before this. There are so few moments in this film that aren't a reference to something. Peter activating the instant kill, Wasp referring to Captain America as Cap, Tony falling and activating his suit from Avengers Tower. There are so many, I keep remembering new ones. I'll be writing a part of this video and then go off to have lunch or something, and in the middle I'll be like, oh wait, there was also Steve's goodbye to Bucky. I'm not trying to list all of them, these are just the ones that popped to my mind afterwards. I definitely did miss something or forget something because I think it's pretty impossible not to after having only seen this once. It's a film that needs to be seen multiple times, or at least one that I really want to watch multiple times. This movie is more of a culmination for this universe than Infinity War was, by a lot, which is crazy because I thought that was as big as it could get really, in terms of bringing this whole massive world together. But Infinity War, I think, was bringing the characters together, while this was bringing this entire universe together, in several different ways, if that makes sense. And again, I mean, I said it with Infinity War, but goddamn, what an achievement. Can you imagine how difficult it would be to balance a film like this out and make it coherent? Now probably the 2 biggest moments of the film, besides Tony's sacrifice, are Cap wielding Mjolnir and the snapped heroes returning with Cap saying, Avengers assemble. The Mjolnir moment we all knew was coming, especially as soon as Mjolnir came into the film, but it was so well done. The build-up, the way it was shot, the music cue, the way you think it might be going to Thor, and then it shoots right past him. It reminded me a bit of when the lightsaber flew to Rey in The Force Awakens. I thought that was a really cool moment there, but here, for me, this was on a whole other level. The amount of investment I have in this character and the build-up to this specific moment over the years, yeah, it's definitely one of the best and one of the most iconic moments in the MCU. And then, the snapped heroes coming back, I mean again, something we all knew was coming, despite Chadwick Boseman's best efforts.
I'm dead.
But the moment was still fantastic. Again, the build-up, the music. I really gotta give some credit to the music here, because just like in Infinity War, it's amazing. Once again, Alan Silvestri knocked it out of the park. It hit all the beats it was supposed to, the epicness, the emotion. Like a good score should, it added so much to already great moments. The combination of the heroes returning with Cap's reaction and that amazing music has got to give you goosebumps. At least I know it did for me. Especially when Peter Parker came back, that was the part that made me smile from ear to ear. Also Sam saying on your left, another fun reference. And then the Avengers assemble moment. I don't know if there's anything I can say won't do it justice. It's epic, it's fun, it's a payoff people have been waiting for, it's the perfect way they could have done it. I loved it, obviously. Also, one of my favorite moments in the film that isn't really as huge or epic as those moments is Sam's last conversation with Cap, when he becomes Captain America. I've already talked about how I feel this film gave the perfect ending for Cap's character. But I also love that Sam is now Captain America. I honestly thought they might do something like that with this passing of the torch, and I thought it was going to go to Bucky. And I've never been crazy about that idea. Or, I don't dislike it, but personally, I enjoy Sam's character more than Bucky's, and I really love his friendship with Steve. He's funny and charismatic and also an interesting character, and when he took the shield, it just made me so happy. Also, that'll add an interesting element to the Falcon and Winter Soldier show. Now, I've already kind of touched on this, but I do want to discuss, does this movie work for non-MCU fans? And I'd say, on the whole, I think you can still be entertained by it. I have friends who don't really care about Marvel who enjoyed it, but I don't think you'll have nearly as good or as fulfilling of an experience if you're not an MCU fan. There are the smaller references that won't make sense, but also big plot points, and really the main story will be really confusing. That being said, I don't think that's a bad thing. That's like if you start watching a TV show at episode 22 and complain that the plot is super confusing. If you have complaints about the plot that are not because you haven't seen the other films, but are just genuine criticism, then that's a whole separate thing. But I don't think the idea that you probably need to see the other films to really enjoy this one to its fullest is a bad thing. I realize this review is a bit different and a bit ramblier than usual, but I think you get why given the uniqueness of this film. In terms of action and effects, I know I've talked a bit about the final battle already, but the action on the whole is great. The Russos have already shown that they can do huge epic battle action, in addition to awesome small-scale hand-to-hand fights, and that's still true here. Pretty much all of the action scenes are great. On that final battle again, if I look beyond the insanity and the awesomeness for 1 second, yes, the backdrop for it is a little dull and gray. That's a complaint I had with the finale of Ready Player One. I felt like that final battle, color scheme-wise, from the background to the actual characters, was just a bit visually uninteresting. But the reason that kind of thing doesn't have the same negative impact for me here is everything else about that final battle. The direction and the way the movie moves around the battle, and also the characters, make up for it. The fact that you care about, like, 50 characters in this final battle and their goals, that's what makes this amazing. And also some fantastic visuals. I want to make this clear. I'm not saying the final battle was visually dull. It wasn't. I'm just saying the background isn't the most visually exciting, but everything else going on in the battle, character-wise and visually speaking, is pretty fantastic. I just don't want people to think I'm a hypocrite for pointing that out in Ready Player One and not having a problem with it here. So that's why I'm explaining how, for me, it's a different situation here. The effects and costumes are nearly all amazing. This time around, there wasn't really any small green screen moment or weird CGI figure that stood out to me as subpar like the other Russo MCU films occasionally have, or just most of the MCU films have at certain brief moments, which I was happy about. I know I mentioned the music, but I also appreciate the way that they used the Ant-Man theme and the Doctor Strange theme. It was very brief, but as someone who knows the themes for the different characters, I appreciate that little bit of continuity. The trailers giving away basically nothing in the grand scheme of the film really added a lot to this, as did the fact that I managed to avoid spoilers in real life for a whole week after the film came out before I saw it. Which, can I just say, I did not think I was going to be able to pull off. But yeah, it made all the surprises and twists in this that much more fun, from the small ones to the huge ones. The Stan Lee cameo was fun, the post-credit scene, or lack thereof, kind of surprised me. I mean, there was the Iron Man 1 making of the suit sound, but I actually kind of like that. While the movie does set up future plot threads, like Sam as Captain America and Thor going off with the Guardians, the lack of a post-credits tease for what's coming next really made this feel like an ending. Obviously, the MCU isn't ending, but if you wanted to just stop watching these films now, here, you could. It felt like a real conclusion to this set of films, and I like that a lot. Speaking of which, the ending and what this sets up is interesting, mainly with Thor and the Guardians. So Valkyrie is the new leader of Asgard, which honestly makes sense. She seems pretty qualified for it. And Thor is now going off with the Guardians, and will probably be in Guardians 3, which I've talked about before, and I think that could be a fun idea. My only concern with that is the power level. Like, the Guardians are significantly less powerful than Thor, and throwing him into the mix, I'm not totally sure how they're going to handle that. But just in terms of the team dynamic, I think it could be fun, as long as they keep the main family dynamic and the emotional core of the Guardians the same. Or maybe he'll pop in occasionally throughout the film, or at one point, kind of like Doctor Strange and Thor Ragnarok. I don't really know, but I'm interested to see where that goes. Also, I guess a big plot point of that will be the Guardians looking for 2014 Gamora, which also sounds interesting. Peter having to basically start his relationship over with the Gamora from the first Guardians after spending years together with her. That sounds like a pretty fascinating direction for that plotline. So yeah, looking forward to James Gunn's Guardians 3 coming probably 2022. In terms of other emotional moments in the film, besides Tony's death and funeral and Steve and Peggy's dance, Natasha's death didn't make me cry, but the two performances in that scene were fantastic. And also the shot of them with their heads together, another one of the best shots in the film. I also loved Scott reuniting with his daughter. I think that's some of the best Paul Rudd acting we've seen in any of the MCU films. Tony reuniting with Peter has also got to be another one of my favorite moments. Just the look of happiness and pure relief on Tony's face It's such a perfect moment. And even Ned reuniting with Peter in that montage at the end made me feel a bit of emotion, just because I'm really invested in that friendship. Also, I heard this thing that the people who got dusted haven't aged at all, so that's why Peter and Ned are still in high school. But does that mean everyone in the MCU is now going to be like, hey, you remember that time you all just died for 5 years and then came back? I mean, yeah, it's a crazy superhero universe, but the Earth, or the way the people on Earth think and act, is generally supposed to be like our own. So I'm not really sure how I feel about that, but hey, we'll see. I am curious how this movie's events will affect future MCU films, like the whole multiverse thing they're going to be exploring more in Far From Home. I will say, the only big emotional moment that didn't hit me as hard as it seems to have hit everyone else is the I Love You 3000 moment. Don't get me wrong, I didn't think it was bad at all. It happened, and I thought, that's really sweet. But then afterwards, I saw online that that was one of the most emotional parts of the film, and for me, it wasn't really. Still, a nice moment. Alright, now, I know a lot of you thought this was a perfect film, and again, seriously, it is an amazing achievement, and an insanely entertaining and satisfying movie. But I went into this thinking, you know what, this probably isn't going to be a totally flawless film, and it isn't. I think it's okay to acknowledge the problems with something, even if you love it. So, let's look at those now. Firstly, this is the main thing I disliked about the film, because it's really my only complaint that stays throughout the entire movie: Thor. I really didn't like the direction they took Thor's character in this, and it actually really surprised me that they chose to do it in this way, because he was easily one of my favorites in Infinity War. That was like a Thor movie, almost. He had the coolest moment, he had one of the most emotional moments, I was invested in his character. And I was really impressed with how Marvel took a character that I didn't really care about that much emotionally, and made him one of my favorites in 2 movies. And here, he's... well, you've all seen the movie, you know what's happened to him. The thing is, I thought that was just going to be a joke in that first scene where we meet him. And I was like, okay, I don't think this is that funny, but at least this isn't going to be throughout the whole film. But nope, it is. I mean, I get wanting to have Thor be depressed after messing up so badly. That's an interesting addition to his character arc. But the way this film did it, to me it felt like an SNL skit about what happened to Thor after he didn't save the universe. Even if it was only for one scene, I would have felt that that didn't really fit with the rest of the movie. But when, for the rest of the film, they made his character really into a joke, especially considering the great direction they took him in Infinity War, personally, I just really didn't like that. Also, it's one thing for them to take this character in that direction, but it's made worse by the fact that I didn't think the joke was very funny. I thought that scene with him rambling on in Avengers HQ went on for too long, especially for something that I didn't think was really funny in the first place. And there are a few moments, like the Fortnite reference or the Hulk dab, that are kind of cringeworthy. Although, at least the dab kind of makes sense in the film, because Bruce Banner, as a character, is an out-of-touch middle-aged guy, so he'd probably think dabbing is still cool, even in 2023, which is when I believe that part of the film is set. But that Fortnite reference is gonna age horribly. People in my cinema groaned when that showed up. And this is 2019. In a few years, that's gonna be rough. And even if you took that out, I still didn't really think that scene was very funny. And really, on the comedy, you know, it's a Marvel movie, it's gonna have jokes in it, I do not have a problem with that. And I thought a lot of the jokes were quite funny, like I mentioned earlier. That being said, some of the really goofy stuff that again just felt kinda like an SNL skit dropped in the middle of the film, I could have done without, like Fat Thor or the Scott Lang time travel test. I don't know, those scenes just felt kind of at odds with the rest of the film. Of course you can have jokes in there, this is a comic book world after all, it is silly, but when it strays too far off comedy-wise, the tone can feel just a little bit inconsistent sometimes. Especially in the post-snap world. Like at some points it felt more serious and depressing, and I liked that. It was a really good tone for this world after this huge event. Like with Steve's support meeting, I really loved that scene. And then there's scenes like with Hulk in the cafe where it just feels like the normal world again, and I guess I just think some of the goofier comedy stuff could have been cut down more here. And there are also a few points here where they have a nice, genuine, emotional moment, and then they tag it with a joke, like Thor saying goodbye to his mom. That was a really nice moment. You really didn't need the joke there. This isn't a huge complaint. I hope this doesn't come across as me saying like, oh, this movie shouldn't have any jokes in it. They need to take the MCU totally seriously. Obviously not. I just felt some of the jokes didn't flow with the rest of this film's world and more epic tone, and or fell a bit flat. Also, on the subject of the post-snap world, I mentioned this with the trailers, I feel like the world should be more devastated after the snap, but whatever, it's a crazy superhero world, they maybe could bounce back from that, that's not a really big deal. My only other kind of big complaint is the editing and pacing of the first half hour or so. I felt there were a few weird editing choices, and I felt some moments were a bit rushed. I've been thinking about this, and maybe the first half hour feeling a bit rushed comes from the fact that that's mostly all the stuff we'd seen in the trailers, so maybe because I'd built that up in my mind, all of it happening in the first 10 to 20 minutes feels rushed. But at the same time, I knew Tony was going to get out of space pretty quickly. I suppose I'll give it more of a pass because the film's already 3 hours long and it's got so much else going on in it that I wouldn't want them to spend a ton of time on that stuff, like in the beginning with Tony stranded in space. that's fine, but some other moments I feel like could have had just a little more time to breathe, like Tony reuniting with Cap. Also, didn't love Captain Marvel being what got Tony and Nebula back to Earth. It makes sense in the universe, but I still think Tony getting out of that situation himself would have been more satisfying, but oh well. In the grand scheme of the film, that's a very small moment. I think another reason it feels a little bit more rushed is that this very immediately feels like the second half of a film, which it is, really. But going into this just as its own film, I felt that was a little jarring and abrupt. Just how it feels like you've sat down in the middle of a film from the very beginning. It takes a little time to settle into. I think when this comes out on digital and you can watch this and Infinity War back to back, that won't really be apparent. But yeah, it just stuck out to me a little bit. Some of the stuff in that first half hour or so feels a bit like, okay, we gotta get this out of the way so we can get to the rest of the film. Which I get, because there is a lot to focus on in the rest of the film, so I do understand why it is the way it is, but I still think it's worth pointing out. Now, all that being said, I do definitely think, on the whole, the good parts of this film make up for the bad parts. By a lot. Actually, by more than a lot. The things I didn't like were Thor's character, some of the editing in the first half hour, and a little bit of the comedy. Those are minuscule complaints when compared to everything else this film does amazingly. The biggest one of those complaints is Thor's character, and even that one isn't absolutely terrible, I was just disappointed by it. He still gets some great moments. When the movie is bad, it's just a little bit awkward, but when it's good, it's mind-blowing. It's an insane and spectacular movie experience, and that more than makes up for the lesser parts. So yeah, it's not perfect, but it's pretty much exactly what you'd want as a Marvel fan. For this Infinity Saga, I can't stress how amazing of a payoff and ending this is. I really loved watching this, and I can't wait to see it many more times. I just love that this movie feels like it was made by fans, but also ones who are really great writers and directors. A lot of the scenes in this felt like something that I would want to put in an Avengers film, but would never think they would actually do. If you've watched my videos on Endgame, you know that. Tons of the stuff I mentioned in those videos that I'd love to see, they did in this film, and executed fantastically. It's such a blast, it's an amazing conclusion to this set of Avengers films, and I'll give it a 9.4 out of 10. And here's how I'd put it in my MCU ranking. Again, this is subject to change the more I let this film sink in, and the more times I see it, but I loved it. Just when I think about some of the moments in it, I can't help but smile. Great job, Marvel and the Russos, you pulled it off. So, those were my thoughts on Avengers Endgame. What did you think of it? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, check out this podcast about movies and TV and whatnot I do with a friend of mine, it's called The Poorly Planned Podcast, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.